silent scout brought a newborn to her door, said, "This one's yours if you'll take her." Martha's hands shook as she turned the deadbolt. The knocking had been soft but insistent, the kind that meant trouble at this hour. Through the peephole, she saw nothing but darkness. But the knocking came again. 3 slow taps, then silence. Her bare feet touched the cold wooden floor as she cracked the door open, security chain still latched. A weathered native man stood on her porch, his face carved by years of wind and sun. In his arms, wrapped in a faded blue blanket, was a baby. The infant's dark eyes were wide open, staring directly at Martha through the narrow gap in the door. The man's presence felt ancient, like he'd been walking these hills since before the town had a name. "Ma'am." His voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through the night air like a blade. Martha's breath caught in her throat. She fumbled with the security chain, her fingers trembling as she slid it free. The door swung open wider, revealing the full scene. The man wore a worn denim jacket over a plain white shirt. His long gray hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, but it was the baby that held her attention. Something about the child's face made her chest tighten with recognition she couldn't place. "This one's yours if you'll take her." The words hit Martha like a physical blow. She gripped the doorframe to steady herself, her knuckles white against the painted wood. "Wait, who are you? Whose baby is this?" The man stepped closer, and Martha caught the scent of sage and tobacco smoke clinging to his clothes. The baby made a soft sound, not quite crying, more like a question. When Martha looked down at the child again, her world tilted sideways. The baby's eyes weren't just dark, they were familiar, the same unusual shade of brown flecked with gold that Martha saw in her mirror every morning. "She's got your eyes, Martha Creek." Martha's heart stopped. Nobody had called her by that name in 15 years, not since she'd changed it, not since she'd buried everything about who she used to be. "How do you know that name?" But the man was already backing away from the porch, his footsteps silent on the wooden planks. The baby reached one tiny hand toward Martha, fingers grasping at the air between them. Without thinking, Martha stepped forward, her arms extending to catch the child. "Wait, please. I need to understand. Where did you get her? Why are you bringing her to me?" The man paused at the edge of the porch light's reach. His face was half in shadow now, but his eyes remained fixed on Martha's. Some debts run deeper than blood. Some promises get kept, even when it takes 40 years. "I don't understand what you're talking about. I've never seen you before in my life." "You have. You just don't remember yet." He looked down at the baby, then back at Martha. "Her mother's gone, died bringing her into this world 3 days ago. But before she passed, she made me swear something, made me promise to find the one person who could protect her from what's coming." Martha felt the weight of the infant in her arms, solid and warm and real. The baby's breathing was steady, peaceful, like she belonged exactly where she was. What's coming? Who was her mother? Questions for another time. Right now, you got a choice to make. Take her in, raise her as your own, or hand her back and forget this ever happened. But know this. The man's voice dropped even lower. "If you send her away, she won't live to see sunrise. There's people already looking for her, people who'd kill to keep their secrets buried." The baby's hand closed around Martha's finger with surprising strength. Martha looked down into those familiar eyes and felt something crack open inside her chest. Something she'd kept locked away since she'd lost everything and started over in this forgotten corner of nowhere. Who are these people? What secrets? Same ones that cost you everything 15 years ago. Same ones that made you change your name and run to this place. The man stepped back another pace, his form beginning to blur with the darkness. Some fights don't end just because you stop fighting them. Martha's mind raced, connecting pieces she'd spent years trying to forget. The investigation that had destroyed her career, the threats that had forced her to disappear, the powerful men who'd made it clear that Martha Creek, the journalist, needed to die so Martha Walsh, the nobody, could live. "You're talking about Governor Blackwood." The man nodded once. "His granddaughter, born to a daughter-in-law who found out too much, just like you did." The baby made another soft sound, and Martha found herself bouncing gently, instinctively soothing her. "If she's his granddaughter, why not take her to him? Why bring her to me?" "Because you're the only one who can keep her safe. And because she's your way back to the truth you've been running from. The man was moving toward an old pickup truck Martha hadn't noticed before, parked just beyond her gate. Her name's Sarah. Her mama wanted her to have that name, no matter what. Martha's legs nearly buckled. Sarah, the same name she'd planned to give her own daughter. If she'd lived long enough to have children, if her life hadn't been torn apart before she could build anything permanent. How could you possibly know that? But the man was already climbing into his truck. The engine turned over with a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the ground beneath Martha's feet. She stepped off the porch, still holding the baby, desperately needing more answers. "Wait, I don't even know your name." The truck began to move, gravel crunching under its tires. Through the open driver's window, she heard his final words carried on the night wind. "Thomas Crowfeather, I'll be watching." The truck disappeared around the bend, its taillights fading to nothing. Martha stood alone in her yard, holding a baby named Sarah, while the silence pressed in around them. The infant looked up at her with those impossible, familiar eyes, and Martha realized with growing certainty that Thomas Crowfeather had known exactly what name she would have chosen. He'd known because someone had told him, someone who'd been watching her longer than she'd ever imagined. Martha carried the baby inside, her hands still trembling from the encounter with Thomas Crowfeather. The living room felt smaller with this new presence, like the walls had shifted inward to accommodate something they weren't prepared for. She settled into the old rocking chair by the window, the same chair where she'd planned to nurse her own children years ago, back when she still believed in futures that made sense. The baby's eyes remained open, alert in a way that seemed impossible for someone so young. Martha pulled the blue blanket away from the tiny face, studying the features that had looked so familiar in the darkness. In the lamplight, the resemblance was even more striking. The same curved eyebrows, the same small, determined chin. "Who are you, little one?" Martha whispered, her voice barely audible in the quiet house. She unwrapped the blanket further, checking for any signs of distress or injury. The baby was perfectly healthy, her skin pink and warm. But as Martha lifted the tiny arm to examine it, her breath caught in her throat. There, on the inside of the baby's left wrist, was a crescent-shaped birthmark, dark red against pale skin, perfectly formed, like a tiny moon in eclipse. Martha's vision blurred. Her hands began to shake so violently, she nearly dropped the child. No, you died. I buried you." The birthmark was identical, exactly identical to the one her daughter Sarah had carried, the daughter who died in the fire 3 years ago. The daughter Martha had lost before she'd even had a chance to hold her properly, before she'd been able to count her fingers and toes and memorize every detail of her perfect face. Martha pressed her palm against her mouth to stop the sob that threatened to tear out of her chest. The baby reached up with that marked hand, grasping at the air between them, and Martha felt like the ground was dissolving beneath her feet. "This isn't possible. You're not possible." She forced herself to breathe, to think like the investigative journalist she used to be, instead of the broken woman she'd become. Birthmarks could be similar, children could look alike, grief could make you see connections that weren't there. But even as she tried to rationalize what she was seeing, her heart hammered against her ribs like something trying to escape. The baby made a soft cooing sound, and Martha noticed something white tucked into the folds of the blanket. A piece of paper, folded small and pinned to the inside of the fabric with a safety pin. Martha's fingers fumbled with the pin, her hand still unsteady from the shock of the birthmark. The paper was cream-colored, expensive, the kind used for official documents or formal correspondence. Martha unfolded it carefully, revealing neat handwriting in black ink. A woman's handwriting, elegant but hurried, like someone writing under pressure. Martha read the words aloud, her voice breaking on every syllable. "Governor Blackwood's granddaughter, born yesterday. He don't know yet." The paper slipped from her fingers, floating to the floor like a dying leaf. Martha stared at the baby, her mind racing through implications she didn't want to accept. Governor Blackwood, the man who destroyed her career, her life, everything she'd tried to build. The man whose corruption she'd exposed in a series of articles that had cost her everything. What kind of game is this? Martha's voice rose, echoing off the walls of the small room. The baby's eyes never left Martha's face, as if she was listening, understanding every word, as if she was trying to communicate something important but didn't have the tools yet. Martha picked up the note again, studying the handwriting more carefully. At the bottom, almost too faint to read, were 2 more words. Trust Thomas. Martha's head snapped up. Thomas Crow Feather, the man who'd brought the baby, the man who'd known her real name, who'd spoken of debts and promises, who'd said the baby's mother was dead, killed bringing her into the world. Your mother wrote this. Martha looked down at the infant who was now gripping the edge of the blanket with tiny fists. She was Blackwood's daughter-in-law. She found out something she wasn't supposed to know, just like I did. And now she's dead. The baby's mouth opened in what might have been a yawn, or might have been an attempt at speech. Martha felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. 3 years ago, her own investigation into Blackwood's land deals had resulted in threats, intimidation, and finally the fire that had taken everything from her. The fire that had killed her unborn daughter and left Martha with nothing but ash and the need to disappear. She gave you the same birthmark. Martha's voice was barely a whisper now. Somehow, some way, you're carrying what I lost. But why? What does Blackwood have to do with any of this? The baby's grip on the blanket tightened, and for a moment Martha could have sworn she saw something ancient and knowing in those dark eyes, something that spoke of connections deeper than blood, of debts that spanned generations, of justice that moved in ways the living world couldn't understand. Outside, the first pale light of dawn was beginning to creep across the horizon. Martha had been sitting with the baby for hours, but it felt like minutes. Time seemed to move differently in the child's presence, like the normal rules didn't quite apply. Martha's phone rang, the harsh electronic sound cutting through the silence like a knife. She glanced at the caller ID and felt her blood freeze. Sheriff Dane, the same Sheriff Dane who'd been suspiciously absent the night of the fire, who'd asked all the wrong questions and found all the wrong answers, who'd made it clear that Martha's investigation needed to end permanently. The phone continued ringing, vibrating against the wooden end table. Martha looked down at the baby, who was staring at the phone like she recognized the sound, like she knew exactly who was calling and why. Martha let the phone ring until it stopped, her heart pounding as she stared at the dark screen. The baby remained perfectly still in her arms, those knowing eyes fixed on Martha's face like she understood the danger that name represented. Sheriff Dane had been calling her Martha Walsh for 3 years now, the name on her mailbox and her few official documents. But he'd investigated the fire that killed her daughter. He'd asked questions about her past that came too close to the truth. The phone buzzed with a text message. Saw your lights on. Coming by to check on you. Martha's blood turned to ice water. She had maybe 5 minutes before his patrol car pulled into her driveway. 5 minutes to hide the most important piece of evidence that had ever fallen into her lap. Martha stood quickly, cradling the baby against her chest. The old house creaked as she moved through the hallway toward the back bedroom, the one she'd converted into storage after losing hope that she'd ever need a nursery again. Cardboard boxes lined the walls, filled with the remnants of her old life. But in the corner, covered by a dusty sheet, sat the crib she'd bought years ago. She pulled the sheet away with one hand, revealing dark wood and pristine mattress. The baby seemed to recognize it somehow, her tiny body relaxing as Martha lowered her into the soft bedding. Stay quiet, little one. Just for a few minutes. Martha closed the bedroom door and hurried back to the living room, scooping up the note that had fallen to the floor. She folded it quickly and shoved it into her jeans pocket just as headlights swept across her front windows. The patrol car's engine rumbled to a stop outside her gate. Heavy footsteps crossed the wooden porch. 3 sharp knocks echoed through the house. Martha took a deep breath and opened the door, forcing her face into what she hoped looked like sleepy confusion. Sheriff Dane stood on her porch, his uniform crisp despite the early hour. He was a big man, tall and broad-shouldered, with graying hair and cold blue eyes that missed nothing. His hand rested casually on his service weapon, a habit that had always made Martha nervous. "Morning, Martha. Sorry to bother you so early." "Sheriff, is everything all right?" "That's what I'm here to find out. Had reports of unusual activity in this area last night. Strange vehicles. Thought I'd check on you." Martha's mouth went dry. Thomas Crow Feather's truck. Someone had seen it. "I didn't see anything unusual. I was asleep." Dane's eyes swept past her into the house, taking in every detail. "Mind if I come in? Just want to make sure you're safe." "Of course." Martha stepped aside, praying the baby would stay quiet. Dane walked into her living room, his boots heavy on the hardwood floor. His gaze lingered on the rocking chair, still pulled close to the window where she'd been sitting with the infant. "You've been up for a while, haven't you? Lights were on when I drove by an hour ago. Couldn't sleep. Sometimes the quiet out here gets to me." Dane nodded, but his expression remained skeptical. He moved toward the hallway, and Martha's heart nearly stopped. "Sheriff, can I get you some coffee? You must be tired. Being out all night." "That's thoughtful of you." But he didn't stop walking. He paused at the entrance to the hall, his head tilted like he was listening for something. "You know, Martha, I've been thinking about you lately. About your past." Martha's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "My past isn't very interesting." "See, that's where you're wrong." Dane turned to face her, his cold eyes boring into hers. Martha Creek was very interesting. Award-winning journalist. Made quite a name for herself exposing corruption in high places. The name hit her like a physical blow. Martha fought to keep her expression neutral, but she could feel the blood draining from her face. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You always were too curious for your own good, Martha." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Martha met his stare, letting some of her old defiance show through. "My curiosity got my daughter killed, didn't it?" Dane's smile was cold and satisfied. Accidents happen, especially to people who ask the wrong questions. "That fire wasn't an accident." "Can you prove that?" Dane stepped closer, using his size to intimidate her. "Because I seem to remember the official investigation found faulty wiring. Case closed." Martha's hands shook with rage, but she kept her voice steady. "Some stones are better left unturned. Isn't that what you told me at the hospital? Smart woman. You learned that lesson well, started over, became someone new, someone safer." Dane's eyes swept the room again. "Be a shame if something happened to disturb that peace you've built here." The threat was unmistakable. Martha took a step back, her mind racing. "Is that a threat, Sheriff?" "Just friendly advice. Sometimes people come around asking questions about the past, stirring up old troubles. Those kinds of people tend to have accidents." From the back bedroom came the faintest sound. A soft coo, barely audible, but Dane's head snapped toward the hallway immediately. His hand moved to his gun. "What was that?" "What was what?" Martha moved to block his path. "I didn't hear anything." Dane pushed past her, heading straight for the back bedroom. Martha followed, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. He reached for the door handle, and Martha knew she was out of time. Whatever happened next would change everything. But as Dane's hand touched the door, his radio crackled to life. "Unit 7, we have a domestic disturbance on Maple Street. Need immediate response." Dane hesitated, his hand still on the door handle. The radio crackled again, more urgent this time. He looked at Martha, suspicion clear in his eyes, but the call couldn't be ignored. "This conversation isn't over." He walked past her toward the front door, his boots echoing through the house. "Stay out of trouble, Martha, for your own good." The door slammed behind him, and Martha collapsed against the wall as his patrol car disappeared down the road. When she finally managed to walk back to the bedroom, she found the baby wide awake, staring at the ceiling like she was watching something Martha couldn't see. Martha pulled the old crib away from the wall to position it better, and a cascade of yellowed newspaper clippings fell from behind it onto the floor. Her own byline stared back at her from dozens of articles, all focused on one man's corrupt empire. Governor Blackwood's face gazed up from the scattered papers, and Martha realized that some fights never really ended. They just waited for the right moment to begin again. Martha knelt on the bedroom floor, surrounded by newspaper clippings that chronicled the most dangerous period of her life. Her own byline stared back at her from dozens of articles, all bearing the name Martha Creek in bold print. The papers were yellowed with age, some torn at the edges, but the words remained as sharp and damaging as the day she'd written them. She picked up the first article, dated 5 years ago. The headline read, "Governor's Land Deals Under Federal Investigation." Below it, her own photograph from when she'd worked for the Tribune, back when she'd believed journalism could change the world, back when she'd been naive enough to think powerful men would simply accept exposure and quietly step down. The baby made a soft sound from the crib, and Martha looked up. Those dark eyes were fixed on her again, watching with an intensity that seemed impossible for someone so young. "You know something, don't you? About what happened to my Sarah?" Martha stood and lifted the infant from the crib, settling back down among the scattered papers. She held the baby in one arm while spreading out the articles with her free hand. The investigation had taken her months, following paper trails through shell companies and dummy corporations, all leading back to one man's insatiable hunger for land and power. "Listen to this, little one." Martha cleared her throat and began reading from her old article. Blackwood Industries acquired 50,000 acres through fraudulent tribal contracts. Documents obtained by this reporter show systematic forgery of Native American signatures on land transfer agreements dating back 15 years. The baby's breathing changed, becoming faster, more agitated. Martha continued reading. Federal investigators confirmed that Governor Harrison Blackwood personally oversaw these illegal transfers, using his political influence to bypass environmental and cultural protection laws. The stolen land contains sacred burial grounds and water rights worth an estimated $200 million. As Martha read, the pieces began falling into place with sickening clarity. The threats had started 2 weeks after this article published. Anonymous phone calls in the middle of the night. Her car tires slashed, windows broken at her apartment, and then the final threat, delivered by Sheriff Dane himself. "Stop digging or face the consequences." Martha's voice grew stronger as she read the next article. Governor Blackwood's response raises more questions. She looked down at the baby, whose tiny fists were clenched now. 3 tribal council members have died in the past 6 months. All 3 were preparing to testify against the governor in federal court. Coincidence or systematic elimination of witnesses? The baby started crying, a sharp, piercing sound that cut through the morning quiet. Martha tried rocking her, but the crying only intensified. She walked around the room, bouncing gently, but nothing seemed to help. The infant's face was red with distress, her small body rigid with what looked like fear. "What is it, sweetheart? What's wrong?" Martha moved toward the window, thinking fresh air might help, but the crying continued. She tried the hallway, then the living room, but everywhere she went, the baby's distress seemed to increase. It was only when Martha passed the old bookshelf in the corner that the crying began to subside. On the middle shelf sat a framed photograph, one of the few personal items Martha had kept from her old life. It showed her parents at their wedding, young and hopeful, standing in front of a small church. Her mother wore a simple white dress, her father a borrowed suit. Behind them, barely visible in the background, stood a Native American man in traditional dress. Martha moved closer to the photograph, and the baby's crying stopped completely. The infant reached out with one tiny hand toward the frame, her fingers stretching as if she recognized something in the image. Martha lifted the photograph from the shelf, studying it more carefully than she had in years. "My grandfather," Martha whispered, pointing to the native man in the background. "My mother's father. Thomas Creek." The name sent a chill down her spine. Thomas. Like Thomas Crowfeather, the man who'd brought the baby to her door. The baby cooed softly, her eyes fixed on the photograph. Martha sank into her rocking chair, holding both the infant and the frame. "He used to tell me stories about the old ways, about how the land remembers everything that happens on it, about how debts get passed down through generations until someone settles them." Martha looked at the baby, who was now completely calm. "You're connected to this somehow. To my family. To my grandfather." She studied the photograph again, noticing details she'd missed before. The church behind her parents wasn't just any church. It was St. Mary's, the same church that had burned down 30 years ago under mysterious circumstances, the same church that had sat on land now owned by Blackwood Industries. "They killed her to shut me up. And now someone's giving me his granddaughter." Martha's mind raced through the implications. The baby wasn't just Blackwood's granddaughter. She was part of something larger, something that connected Martha's family to the corruption she'd tried to expose. The stolen land, the murdered witnesses, the fraudulent contracts, it all led back to a pattern of violence that stretched back decades. She looked at the scattered newspaper articles, seeing them now as pieces of a much larger puzzle. Her investigation hadn't just threatened Blackwood's current schemes. It had threatened to expose a legacy of theft and murder that went back to her grandfather's generation. maybe further. The fire that killed my Sarah wasn't random retaliation. Martha's voice was barely a whisper. It was planned, calculated. They knew exactly how to hurt me in a way that would destroy any fight I had left. The baby gurgled softly, her tiny hand still reaching toward the photograph. Martha realized she was looking at the native man in traditional dress, as if she recognized him somehow, as if she'd seen him before. Thomas Crow Feather is family, isn't he? Related to my grandfather somehow. That's how he knew my real name, how he knew about Sarah. Martha felt tears forming in her eyes. Someone's been watching over me this whole time, waiting for the right moment to bring me back into the fight. Outside, the sound of a car engine interrupted her thoughts. Martha looked through the window and felt her blood freeze. A black sedan was pulling into her driveway, its government plates clearly visible even from this distance. The car moved slowly, deliberately, like a predator approaching wounded prey. Martha clutched the baby closer to her chest, her heart hammering as the sedan came to a stop beside her mailbox. Two figures sat in the front seats, but the tinted windows made it impossible to see their faces. They sat there for a long moment, watching the house, and Martha realized that Sheriff Dane's visit had been just the beginning. Now the real players were arriving. Martha moved away from the window, clutching the baby protectively as the black sedan's doors opened. Two figures emerged, dressed in identical dark suits that looked expensive and out of place in the rural morning light. They moved with mechanical precision, walking in perfect synchronization toward her front porch. Something about their movements made Martha's skin crawl. The baby had gone completely still in her arms, her dark eyes wide and alert. Martha could feel the infant's heartbeat accelerating, matching her own racing pulse. The knock on the door came exactly 3 times, sharp and authoritative. Martha took a deep breath and opened the door, keeping the security chain latched. Through the narrow gap, she could see 2 pale faces staring back at her. The agents looked almost identical, with the same cold gray eyes and thin-lipped expressions. Their features seemed somehow wrong, like photographs that had been slightly blurred. "Ma'am, we're federal agents. We need to speak with you about a missing child." The voice came from the taller agent, but his lips barely moved. Martha noticed his partner hadn't blinked once since she'd opened the door. "I'd like to see some identification." Both agents reached into their jacket pockets simultaneously, producing leather wallets with gold badges. They held them up to the gap in the door, but when Martha tried to focus on the details, the badges seemed to shimmer and shift before her eyes. "Ma'am, we need you to hand over the child immediately." Martha's grip tightened on the baby. "What child? I don't know what you're talking about." "The infant that was taken from Governor Blackwood's residence 3 days ago. We have reliable information that she's being held at this location." The baby made a soft whimpering sound, and Martha felt her tiny body begin to tremble. "Show me your badges again." Slower this time. The agents exchanged a glance that lasted a fraction too long. When they held up their identification again, Martha squinted at the text. The words seemed to move on the badges, letters rearranging themselves like living things. She couldn't make out a single coherent word. "We don't have time for this, ma'am. Please step aside." The shorter agent pushed against the door, but the security chain held. Martha slammed the door shut and turned the deadbolt, her hands shaking. The baby's whimpering had turned into a low, continuous sound that was unlike any cry Martha had ever heard. Heavy footsteps circled the house. Martha heard them testing windows, checking the back door. She retreated to the living room, holding the baby close to her chest. Through the front window, she could see the agents standing on her porch, but their faces looked different now. The features were blurring together like watercolors in the rain. A loud bang echoed through the house as something struck the back door. Then another. They were trying to break in. Martha looked down at the baby, whose strange crying had grown louder. The infant's eyes were completely black now, reflecting no light at all. The front door exploded inward, wood splintering as the agents forced their way inside. Martha backed against the far wall, clutching the baby protectively. Up close, the agents' faces were even more disturbing. Their skin had a waxy quality, and their movements were too fluid, like they weren't quite solid. "Hand over the child. She's not going anywhere with you." The taller agent stepped forward, reaching out with hands that seemed to have too many fingers. You're interfering with a federal investigation. The baby doesn't want to go with you." Both agents stopped moving, their heads tilted at identical angles, and when they spoke again, their voices were perfectly synchronized. "That's not possible, ma'am. Babies don't want anything." But the baby was proving them wrong. Her crying had become something beyond human sound, a wail that seemed to come from somewhere deep underground. The windows began to vibrate in their frames, and Martha felt the floorboards trembling beneath her feet. "What is that sound?" The agents looked at each other with confusion that seemed genuine for the first time. Their carefully composed expressions were cracking, revealing something alien underneath. The baby's cry grew louder, more piercing, and the front window developed a spiderweb of cracks. "Make it stop." "We can't. Something's wrong." Martha watched in fascination as the agents' faces began to change more dramatically. Their features were sliding around like melting plastic, eyes and mouths repositioning themselves in ways that defied anatomy. Whatever they really were, they weren't human. The baby's scream reached a crescendo that made Martha's ears ring. Every window in the house cracked simultaneously, and she heard glass breaking in the kitchen. The agents stumbled backward, their hands pressed to their ears, their faces now completely distorted. "Take the child and go." "We can't." "She won't let us." One of the agents lunged forward, reaching for the baby with hands that now looked more like claws. But as soon as he got within arm's length, the infant's scream became something that Martha felt in her bones. A sound that spoke of ancient anger and protection that ran deeper than blood. The agent was thrown backward as if struck by an invisible force. He hit the wall hard enough to crack the plaster, then slid to the floor in a heap. His partner tried a different approach, circling around to Martha's left, but the baby's supernatural wail followed him, and he too was repelled by some unseen barrier. "This isn't over. The governor will have what belongs to him." The agents retreated toward the broken door, their forms becoming more indistinct with each step. By the time they reached the porch, they looked more like shadows than people. Martha followed them to the doorway, still holding the baby, whose crying had finally begun to subside. She watched as the agents approached their black sedan, but when the taller one tried to open the driver's door, nothing happened. He tried again, then looked at his partner with visible confusion. They walked around the car, trying every door, but none would open. One of them popped the hood, but immediately slammed it shut again, stepping back as if he'd been burned. The agents stood beside their useless vehicle for several minutes, speaking in voices too low for Martha to hear. Finally, they began walking down the gravel road, their forms becoming less distinct with each step until they disappeared entirely into the morning mist. Martha looked down at the baby, who was now completely calm. Her eyes returned to their normal dark brown. As she turned to go back inside, movement in the tree line caught her eye. Thomas Crow Feather stood among the pines, watching the house with patient eyes. When he saw her looking, he raised one hand in a gesture that might have been a greeting or blessing, then melted back into the shadows of the forest. Martha stood in her doorway, still holding the baby, watching Thomas Crow Feather emerge from the tree line. He moved with the same quiet grace she remembered from the night before, but in daylight she could see him more clearly. His weathered face bore scars she hadn't noticed in the darkness, and his long gray hair was streaked with white. He walked toward her house like a man who had all the time in the world. The baby had gone completely still in Martha's arms, her dark eyes tracking Thomas's approach. As he drew closer, Martha noticed something else. The infant's breathing had synchronized with his footsteps, as if they were connected by some invisible thread. Thomas stopped at the base of her porch steps, his hands hanging loose at his sides. "They won't be back today, but they'll send others." Who were they? What were they? Shadows wearing faces. Blackwood's got people who ain't people working for him now. Thomas looked at the baby, and his expression softened. "She protected you, just like I knew she would." Martha descended the steps slowly, studying his face in the morning light. Something about his features nagged at her, a familiarity she couldn't place. "You said your name was Thomas Crow Feather." "That's right. My great-uncle was named Thomas Creek, but he died 30 years ago." Thomas smiled, the expression transforming his weathered features. "I've been waiting 30 years to bring her to you." Martha's legs nearly gave out. She gripped the porch railing for support, the baby secure in her other arm. "You're supposed to be dead, Uncle Thomas." "Death's just another kind of silence. This baby breaks silences." Martha stared at him, trying to reconcile the man standing before her with the uncle she'd known as a child. Thomas Creek had been her mother's older brother, a Vietnam veteran who'd struggled with demons no one talked about in those days. He'd disappeared when Martha was 8 years old, and the family had found his truck at the bottom of Miller's Gorge 6 months later. "The accident, the gorge, they found your body. They found a body. Wasn't mine." Thomas climbed the porch steps, moving closer to Martha and the baby. "I had to disappear. Had to become someone else. Same as you did when you became Martha Walsh." The baby reached out toward Thomas, her tiny fingers grasping at the air between them. He extended one weathered hand, and the infant wrapped her fingers around his thumb with surprising strength. "She knows you. She knows lots of things. That's what makes her special." Thomas looked into the baby's eyes, and Martha saw something pass between them, a communication beyond words. She's more than just Blackwood's granddaughter. She's a bridge. A bridge to what? Between the living and the dead. Between the truth and the lies people tell to hide their sins. Thomas gently freed his thumb from the baby's grip. Every violent death leaves a mark. Every injustice cries out for balance. She can see those marks. She can hear those cries. Martha felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying this little girl can show you things that happened in the past. Things that were covered up. Things that powerful men thought they'd buried forever." The baby made a soft cooing sound, and Martha noticed the temperature around them had dropped several degrees. Her breath began to mist in the air, even though moments before it had been warm enough for shirt sleeves. "She's gonna show you what really happened that night. Your Sarah died." Martha's heart clenched. "My Sarah's dead. I buried her myself. You buried a coffin. But you never saw what really happened in that house before the fire started. You never saw who said it." Thomas's voice grew harder. "This baby can show you the truth, but you got to be ready for what you're gonna see." Martha looked down at the infant, whose dark eyes seemed to hold depths that went beyond anything natural. How is this possible? Her mother wasn't just any woman. She was gifted, came from a long line of women who could see beyond the veil. Thomas moved closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "When she died, bringing this child into the world, some of that gift passed on, but it got twisted by all the violence surrounding her birth. All the corruption and murder that runs in Blackwood's bloodline." The baby's eyes had changed again, becoming deeper, darker, like looking into a well at midnight. Martha felt drawn to those depths, as if something important waited there in the darkness. "Why bring her to me? Why not keep her yourself?" "Because you're family. Because you got the right to know the truth about your daughter's death. And because this little girl needs someone who understands what it's like to lose everything to powerful men who think they're above justice." The temperature continued to drop, and Martha saw her breath forming small clouds in the air. Inside the house, shadows were moving in ways that defied the position of the sun. Dark shapes drifted across the walls like smoke, and Martha heard sounds that might have been whispers or might have been wind. "She's starting to show you already." Thomas stepped back, giving Martha space to process what was happening. "The spirits of the dead, they're drawn to her. They know she can reveal their stories." Martha clutched the baby closer, feeling the infant's warmth against the growing cold. The child's eyes were completely black now, reflecting no light, and when Martha looked into them, she began to see images forming in their depths. A house she recognized, flames, and figures moving in the darkness before the fire started. "I'm not ready for this. Nobody ever is. But ready or not, the truth's coming. And once it starts, there ain't no stopping it." Martha stepped back into the house, holding the baby close as the temperature continued to plummet. Thomas followed her inside, his boots silent on the hardwood floor. The shadows on the walls were moving faster now, swirling in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The baby's eyes remained completely black, reflecting depths that seemed to go on forever. "Just let it happen," Thomas said softly. "Don't fight what she's showing you." Martha sat down in the rocking chair, the same chair where she'd held the baby through the long night. As soon as she settled, the room around her began to fade. The walls became transparent, like looking through smoke, and new images began to form in their place. She was looking at her old house, the one that had burned 3 years ago, the one where she'd lost everything. But this wasn't the house as she remembered it from that terrible night. This was the house as it had been before the fire started, when she'd still been pregnant, when she'd still believed she could build a safe life away from the corruption she'd exposed. "No," Martha whispered. "I don't want to see this." But the vision continued, pulling her deeper into the past. She watched herself moving through the familiar rooms, heavily pregnant, preparing for bed. Her past self had been exhausted, worn down by months of threats and fear, but still hopeful that the baby would arrive safely. The scene shifted, and Martha saw figures moving outside the house, men in dark clothing, their faces hidden by shadows. She recognized Sheriff Dane's distinctive silhouette immediately. He was directing the others, pointing at different parts of the house, giving orders in a voice too low to hear. "They planned it," Martha said, her voice breaking. "They didn't just threaten me. They planned to kill us both." Thomas stood beside her, his weathered hand resting gently on her shoulder. "Keep watching. You need to see it all." Martha watched in horror as the men spread out around the house. One of them carried a container that sloshed with liquid, gasoline. Another had what looked like timing devices. This wasn't a crime of passion or a warning gone wrong. This was a carefully orchestrated execution. The vision shifted again, taking Martha inside the house. She watched her past self lying in bed, unaware of the danger surrounding her. The men had cut the phone lines and disabled the smoke detectors. They'd planned for her to die in her sleep, never knowing what hit her. But something went wrong with their plan. Martha saw her past self wake up, alerted by a sound from outside. She got out of bed and moved toward the window, and that's when the first flames appeared. The fire spread faster than anyone could have expected, racing through the house with unnatural speed. Martha watched herself trying to escape, but the exits were blocked. The men had made sure of that. They'd wanted to guarantee she wouldn't survive to continue her investigation. She saw her past self trapped in the bedroom, smoke filling her lungs, the heat growing unbearable. "My baby," Martha whispered, tears streaming down her face. "My Sarah." That's when the vision changed. Martha saw something she'd never known before, something that had happened in those final moments. As her past self collapsed from the smoke, a figure appeared beside her, translucent and glowing with soft light, but unmistakably the daughter she'd never gotten to hold. The ghostly child reached out and touched her dying mother's face. "Mama, I've been watching over her." Martha's breath caught. The voice was coming from the baby in her arms, but the words belonged to her daughter, her Sarah, speaking from beyond death. "They thought killing me would stop your investigation." The vision shifted again, showing Martha events she'd never seen. Her daughter's spirit staying close to the scene of the fire, watching as Sheriff Dane and the other men congratulatory each other on a job well done. Watching as they planted evidence to make it look like an accident. Watching as they covered up their crime. "But I never left, Mama. I've been waiting for the right time to help you find the truth." Martha looked down at the baby, whose black eyes now showed scenes of the past 3 years. Her daughter's spirit, invisible to the living world, but always present, always watching, always protecting. "Baby, I'm so sorry. I should have protected you. You couldn't have known, but you can protect her now." The baby's mouth moved, but Sarah's voice came out. "She's the key to stopping them." The visions accelerated, showing Martha glimpses of her daughter's spirit guiding events from beyond. Sarah had been the one who led Thomas Crowfeather to the baby. She'd been the one who influenced the infant's mother to write the note, to trust Thomas with her dying wish. She'd been orchestrating this reunion across the boundary between life and death. "The baby, she's special because of you, because of what they did to us." Sarah's voice grew stronger, more urgent. "She can see the truth because she carries our pain, our need for justice." Martha saw more visions now. Governor Blackwood in his mansion, unaware that his granddaughter had been taken. Sheriff Dane receiving frantic phone calls, scrambling to find the missing infant. The false agents being dispatched to retrieve her, only to be repelled by forces they couldn't understand. "They're scared, Mama. For the first time in their lives, they're scared. The temperature in the room began to rise, and the shadows on the walls started to fade. The baby's eyes slowly returned to their normal dark brown, and Martha felt the supernatural connection beginning to weaken. "Don't go," Martha pleaded. "Please don't leave me again." "I'm not leaving. I'm always with you, but now you got work to do." Sarah's voice was fading, becoming harder to hear. "Use what I showed you. Make them pay for what they did to us." The visions disappeared completely, leaving Martha alone in her living room with Thomas and the baby. But the knowledge remained, burned into her memory with perfect clarity. She'd seen the truth about her daughter's death. She'd seen the faces of the men responsible, and she'd seen that justice was possible, even for crimes that seemed beyond punishment. Thomas nodded as if he'd witnessed everything she'd experienced. "Now you know. Now I know." Martha's voice was steady, filled with a determination she hadn't felt in 3 years. Her phone buzzed on the side table, interrupting the moment. Martha glanced at the screen and saw a text from an unknown number. The words chilled her blood even as they strengthened her resolve. "We're coming for the baby. Tonight." Martha looked at Thomas, then down at the infant who carried so much power and so much pain. "Let them come." The sun had set by the time the convoy of black vehicles rolled up Martha's gravel driveway. 3 SUVs and a limousine, their headlights cutting through the darkness like predator eyes. Martha stood at her front window, holding the baby, watching as doors opened and armed figures emerged from the shadows. Thomas had positioned himself by the back door, his weathered hands steady despite his age. "You ready for this?" "As ready as I'll ever be." Governor Harrison Blackwood stepped out of the limousine, his expensive suit immaculate despite the rural setting. Even in the dim light, Martha could see the cold calculation in his eyes, the same look she'd seen in newspaper photographs for years. Sheriff Dane flanked him, along with 6 other men carrying weapons that looked military grade. The baby had gone completely still in Martha's arms, but her eyes were shifting again, becoming deeper and darker with each passing second. The temperature in the house began to drop, and Martha saw her breath starting to mist. Heavy footsteps crossed the porch. The knock, when it came, was barely polite. Martha opened the door before they could break it down, the baby secure in her arms. "Governor Blackwood, Sheriff, what brings you to my home so late?" Blackwood stepped forward, his presence filling the doorway. Up close, Martha could see the family resemblance in his features. The same dark eyes as the baby, the same determined chin. But where the infant radiated innocence, Blackwood emanated corruption like a physical stench. "That baby belongs to my family." "She belongs to the truth." Blackwood's eyes narrowed. "I don't have time for games, Miss Walsh, or should I say, Miss Creek. Yes, we know exactly who you are, the journalist who tried to destroy me with her lies." "They weren't lies. Everything I wrote was true. Truth is a luxury I can't afford." Blackwood gestured to his men, who moved into formation around the porch. "Hand over my granddaughter, and we'll make this quick." Martha stepped back, but didn't retreat. The baby's eyes were completely black now, and the air inside the house had become so cold that frost was forming on the windows. "She's not going anywhere with you." Sheriff Dane pushed past Blackwood, his hand resting on his service weapon. "Don't make this harder than it has to be, Martha. We know what happened to your daughter was unfortunate, but business is business." "Business? You murdered my child." "Casualties of progress. Sometimes sacrifices have to be made for the greater good." That's when the shadows began to move. At first, Martha thought it was just her imagination, but the darkness in the corners of the room was shifting, taking shape, becoming something more substantial. The baby made a sound that was barely audible, but the effect was immediate. Figures began materializing in the dim light of the living room, translucent at first, but growing more solid with each passing moment. Native American families in traditional dress, their faces marked by violence and betrayal, children who died too young, elders who'd been murdered for defending their land. And, standing among them, Martha saw her daughter Sarah, no longer a child, but grown into the young woman she would have become. Her spirit glowed with soft light, her eyes filled with the same determination Martha remembered from the visions. Blackwood and his men froze as the spirits surrounded them. "What the hell is this?" Justice, Martha said simply. The baby's supernatural influence filled the room like a tide, washing over everyone present. Martha felt it too, but it didn't compel her the way it affected the others. She was protected, chosen, part of whatever cosmic balance was finally being restored. Sheriff Dane was the first to break. The words came spilling out of him like water from a broken dam, his voice hollow and mechanical. We killed the journalist's daughter, set the fire ourselves. Dane, shut up! But Dane couldn't stop himself. The baby's power was too strong, the accumulated guilt and violence too heavy to carry any longer. Gasoline and timing devices made it look like an accident. Wanted to make sure she couldn't continue the investigation. One of the armed men tried to raise his weapon, but his hands were shaking so violently he couldn't hold it steady. The spirits pressed closer, their presence filling every corner of the room with an otherworldly chill. Blackwood fought against the supernatural compulsion, his face red with rage and effort, but the baby's influence was relentless, drawing truth from him like poison from a wound. 37 families. We stole their land, killed anyone who complained. No. Blackwood's voice cracked with desperation. I won't let you destroy everything I've built. But the confessions continued, each word dragged from him against his will. The Creek family first. Thomas Creek found out about the fraudulent contracts, had to eliminate him before he could testify. Martha's great-uncle Thomas stepped forward from the shadows, his living form joining the spirits of the dead. I'm still here, Harrison. Still waiting for justice. The tribal council members, the witnesses, all of them had to die to protect the operation. Blackwood's voice was breaking now, decades of buried guilt pouring out in a torrent. We used the sheriff's department, the governor's office, federal connections. Anyone who got in our way disappeared. Sheriff Dane was sobbing now, his composed facade completely shattered. 43 murders over 15 years made them all look like accidents or suicides. Covered up every investigation. The armed men had all dropped their weapons, overwhelmed by the supernatural presence filling the room. Some were on their knees, others backed against the walls, all of them confessing their crimes in voices that sounded like they were speaking from underwater. Martha's daughter Sarah moved closer to her mother and the baby, her spirit glowing brighter as the truth finally came to light. The infant reached out toward her spiritual sister, and for a moment, Martha saw them both clearly, the daughter she'd lost and the child who'd been given to her. Connected by something deeper than blood, bound together by the need for justice. Every contract forged, every death ordered, every family destroyed. Blackwood was on his knees now, tears streaming down his face as decades of carefully hidden crimes poured out of him. The mining rights, the water access, the sacred burial grounds. We took it all. The baby made one final sound, a cry that seemed to come from the earth itself, and suddenly, the room was filled with the voices of the dead. Every victim, every family member, every person who died because of Blackwood's greed. Their words overlapped and intertwined, creating a chorus of testimony that no court could ignore. Outside, new vehicle engines rumbled to life. Headlights swept across the windows, but these weren't the same black SUVs. Martha looked out and saw official government sedans with federal license plates. Real FBI agents, not the shadows that had come before. As dawn began to break over the horizon, Martha realized that someone had called the authorities. Someone who'd been watching and waiting for exactly the right moment to ensure that justice would finally be served. The supernatural presence in the room began to fade as natural light crept through the windows. The spirits of the dead, their testimony finally heard, started to disappear one by one. But Sarah lingered, her glowing form staying close to Martha and the baby. It's finished, Mama. They can't hurt anyone else now. The real FBI agents moved with professional efficiency that was starkly different from the supernatural shadows that had come before. Agent Rebecca Santos, a woman in her 40s with steel gray hair and sharp eyes, led the team through Martha's front door. Behind her came 3 other agents. Their weapons drawn but pointed at the floor, their federal badges clearly visible in the morning light. Federal Bureau of Investigation, nobody move. Governor Blackwood tried to stand, his expensive suit wrinkled and stained with tears from his supernatural confession. This is outrageous. I demand to speak to my attorney. You'll have that opportunity, Governor. Right now, you're under arrest for conspiracy, murder, and racketeering." Agent Santos nodded to her team, who immediately began restraining Blackwood and his men. Sheriff Dane was still on his knees, his face pale and haunted from the night's revelations. When the FBI agent approached him with handcuffs, he didn't resist. "It's over, isn't it? It's over." Martha stepped forward, still holding the baby, who had returned to normal except for an unusual alertness in her dark eyes. "Ma'am, we have enough evidence to prosecute." "How did you know to come here?" Agent Santos glanced toward Thomas, who was standing quietly by the window, watching the arrests with satisfaction. "We received a very detailed package of evidence 3 days ago. Documents, recordings, witness statements. Someone has been building a case against Governor Blackwood for years." Martha looked at her great-uncle, understanding beginning to dawn. "The recording. You recorded everything that happened here tonight." Thomas reached into his jacket and pulled out a small digital device. "Been carrying this for 30 years, waiting for the right moment to use it. Every word they said is on here, every confession. But how is that evidence admissible? They were compelled by supernatural forces." Agent Santos smiled grimly. "Funny thing about confessions. They tend to lead to other evidence. Bank records, property transfers, witness statements from people who were too scared to talk before. Once we started pulling the thread, the whole thing unraveled." 2 agents were loading Governor Blackwood into the back of a federal vehicle. He turned back toward Martha, his face twisted with rage and defeat. "This isn't over. My family has connections you can't imagine. Your family doesn't want anything to do with you anymore." Thomas stepped forward, holding an envelope. "Your daughter-in-law made sure of that before she died." Martha felt the baby stir in her arms at the mention of her mother. "Tell me about her, about the woman who gave birth to this child." Thomas opened the envelope carefully, revealing several pages of handwritten letter and official documents. Her name was Elena Blackwood, married the governor's son 5 years ago. Sweet girl, but curious. Too curious for her own good. "Like Martha," Agent Santos observed. "Like Martha." Thomas unfolded the first page of the letter. Elena found out about her father-in-law's crimes when she was going through some old family papers. Land deals that didn't make sense. Payments to shell companies. Names of people who died under suspicious circumstances. Martha looked down at the baby, who was reaching up toward the letter as if she recognized her mother's handwriting. What did she do with the information? Started collecting evidence, copying documents, recording conversations. She was building a case just like you did, but she was smarter about it. She knew they'd kill her if they found out. Thomas handed Martha the letter. "Her mama sent me a letter before she died. Said Martha Creek was the only one brave enough to finish what she started." Martha read the elegant handwriting with growing amazement. Elena had documented everything, creating a complete picture of Blackwood's criminal empire that spanned decades. Bank accounts, property transfers, murder contracts, even the names of corrupt officials in multiple agencies. She knew she was going to die in childbirth. She had complications early on. Doctor told her the chances weren't good. That's when she reached out to me. Thomas's voice grew softer. "Elena found my name in some old family papers. Your mother had kept letters I'd sent her years ago, before I had to disappear. Elena tracked me down and asked me to make sure the baby got to you if anything happened to her." Agent Santos looked at the documents Thomas was showing them. "This is incredible. She documented crimes going back 20 years. With this evidence and tonight's confessions, we can shut down the entire operation." Outside, more federal vehicles were arriving. Crime scene technicians, forensic accountants, investigators who would spend months unraveling the full scope of Blackwood's corruption. Martha watched through her window as Sheriff Dane was loaded into a different vehicle, his career and his life effectively over. "What happens to the baby now?" "That's up to you." Agent Santos smiled at the infant, who was staring at her with those impossibly knowing eyes. "Legally, she has no other family. Her father died 2 years ago, and her mother named you as guardian in her will." Martha felt her heart skip. "She named me." Thomas nodded. "Elena researched you thoroughly before she made her decision. She knew about your daughter Sarah, about the fire, about everything you'd lost. She believed you were the only person who could protect her child and see that justice was done." The baby made a soft sound, and Martha realized she was looking at the photograph of her parents that still sat on the bookshelf, the same photograph that had calmed her the night before when she'd seen Martha's grandfather standing behind her parents at their wedding. She's been planning this since before the baby was born. Martha's voice was filled with wonder. Elena, Sarah, even you, Uncle Thomas, you've all been working together to bring me this child. Some debts take generations to settle. Thomas folded the letter carefully, but they always get settled eventually. Agent Santos approached Martha with a clipboard of official forms. If you're willing, we can begin the adoption process immediately. Given the circumstances and your relationship to the case, it should move quickly through the courts. Martha looked down at the baby, who was gripping her finger with surprising strength. 6 months from now, she realized she would be rocking this child in the same chair where she'd once planned to rock her daughter, Sarah. The circle would be complete, and the silence that had surrounded her family's tragedies would finally be broken. 6 months had passed since the night that changed everything. Martha sat in the old rocking chair by the window, the same chair where she'd first held the mysterious infant brought to her door. But now the baby had a name, legal papers, and a future that stretched ahead like an open road. Sarah Truth Creek. The name felt right on Martha's lips, honoring both the daughter she'd lost and the truth that had finally set them all free. The house felt different now, warmer. The shadows no longer moved independently, and the temperature stayed constant. The supernatural presence that had filled these rooms during those terrifying days had settled into something peaceful, protective, rather than haunting. Your mama was very brave. She made sure you'd be safe. Martha spoke to the baby, as she often did during their evening routine. Sarah Truth was 6 months old now, alert and healthy, with dark eyes that seemed to understand more than any infant should. She'd grown into a beautiful child, with Elena's delicate features, but something indefinably stronger underneath. The legal proceedings had moved swiftly. Once the full scope of evidence became clear, Governor Blackwood was serving life in federal prison, his empire of corruption dismantled piece by piece. Sheriff Dane had cooperated fully with investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence, providing details about murders and cover-ups that went back decades. 37 families had received justice at last, and the stolen tribal lands were being returned to their rightful owners. Martha had used the reward money from the federal government to fix up the house and establish a college fund for Sarah Truth. She had also donated a substantial amount to a legal defense fund for Native American land rights, a cause that felt personal now in ways she was still discovering. Time for your story, little one. Martha opened the worn children's book she'd been reading each night. It was one she'd bought years ago for the daughter she'd lost, saved in a box in the attic until she'd needed it again. As she began to read, her voice soft and steady, she felt a familiar presence entering the room. The temperature didn't drop this time. There was no supernatural chill or moving shadows. Instead, warmth filled the space around the rocking chair, and Martha looked up to see her daughter Sarah standing beside them. Not the ghostly, ethereal figure from before, but solid and real, glowing with soft light that seemed to come from within. "Hello, Mama." "Sarah." Martha's voice caught in her throat. "You look so beautiful." Her daughter smiled, and Martha saw the woman she would have become. Strong, compassionate, with eyes that held both wisdom and kindness. Sarah knelt beside the rocking chair, reaching out to touch the baby's cheek with a translucent hand. "She's perfect. Elena chose well. Take care of her, Mama. She's got important work to do when she grows up." Martha looked down at the infant, who was staring directly at her spiritual sister with recognition and joy. "What kind of work?" "The same work you did. The same work Elena tried to do. Speaking truth to power, protecting people who can't protect themselves." Sarah's form was beginning to fade, but her voice remained clear. "She'll be stronger than both of us. She carries the gifts of 3 bloodlines now." Martha reached out toward her daughter, and for a moment she felt solid flesh beneath her fingers. "I will. I promise." "I know you will. You're the strongest woman I know." Sarah stood, her light growing brighter as she prepared to leave. "Thank you for bringing her home. Thank you for bringing her to me." Martha watched as her daughter's spirit began to dissolve into points of light that drifted toward the window and disappeared into the evening sky. But this time the departure felt different, final but peaceful, like a story ending the way it was supposed to. Martha continued reading to Sarah Truth until the baby fell asleep in her arms. Then she carried her out to the front porch, settling into the old wooden swing that overlooked the valley below. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. From the tree line, Uncle Thomas emerged one last time. He was different now, translucent like Sarah had been, his earthly mission finally complete. He raised one weathered hand in farewell, and Martha waved back, understanding that he too was ready to rest. As Thomas faded into the gathering dusk, Martha looked down at Sarah Truth, who was reaching one tiny hand toward the setting sun. In that moment, with the light catching the baby's dark eyes just right, Martha saw something extraordinary. Reflected in those innocent pupils were the faces of women who had come before. Elena Blackwood, brave and determined. Martha's own mother, strong and resilient. Her grandmother and great-grandmother, and generations of women who had faced impossible odds and survived. Sarah Truth gurgled softly, her fingers grasping at the evening light, and Martha realized she was looking at the future. Not just her daughter's future, but the future of justice itself, carried forward by women who refused to be silenced. The circle was complete, but the story was just beginning.